Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is a massive privilege to speak on behalf of my constituent, Wilma Ord, on behalf of those other victims, and I declare an interest as a Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Hormone Pregnancy Drugs, alongside the incredible campaigner and Honourable Member for Bolton South East. She has done the most wonderful job, and we have stood side by side. This was one of the first cases that I ever dealt with as a constituency member back in 2015, when Wilma Ord and her daughter Kirstine came to my constituency surgery. And she, like so many of the victims and our constituents who've been mentioned today, her doctor took out a pill from his top drawer when she was pregnant, handed it over to her, and she trusted him. And that is ultimately what this debate is about. It's about that social contract that our constituents have between us as parliamentarians and governors, between their doctors and the institutions of the NHS, and also of those private companies who are allowed into that space by us and by government, and the lack of regulation. If the government continues to refuse to do nothing about this, we can only conclude that these have been acts of state-sanctioned harm, because these companies were allowed to operate within the framework of our society, and harm was done to our constituents. Now, the other issue that has not been touched on an awful lot is about the flawed and failed legal process, and that is something that I will touch on. But I do want to pay tribute to Mary Lyon. She is a remarkable campaigner. I also want to pay tribute to Jason Farrell of Sky News, who has done an incredible job and produced a documentary, Primidos, the Secret Drug Scandal, which I would encourage any members to watch. I also want to pay tribute to Baroness Cumberledge for her remarkable work. And of course, to the Right Honourable Lady from Maidenhead, I would say that this is probably, in my opinion, one of her greatest achievements of her time in office. There may be many things on which we disagree, but we will continue, I'm sure, to stand shoulder to shoulder. And the Minister should be aware that we are not going anywhere. And whatever happens at the next election, this issue is going to be an issue that parliamentarians from every single party in this place will continue to hold the government to account on. And the scientists, Carl Hennigan and Neil Vargason, have been mentioned numerous times. Their work has also been crucial. And in 2020, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead was right when she said, "I feel as though women were being patted on the head and being told, there, dear, don't worry, you're imagining it. You don't know, we know better than you." And I have to say I agree wholeheartedly. That is exactly how my constituent was made to feel. She was gaslit. And when I sat with her recently, and I have sat with her many, many times, she lost her husband, George, a year ago. He died not knowing the truth and not seeing justice. It feels very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, like this government is waiting for people to die rather than taking action. And that is for shame. So when I met with Wilma recently, we talked a little bit about what the future holds. And as other members have said about their constituents, they are scared. They are scared about what will happen next, and they are scared about what the process and the future will hold. And I want to talk just a little bit about that process, because when our constituents, some of our constituents, took that legal action to court, the litigation was cumbersome, it was expensive, and the campaigners were felt after the judicial decision this year that they had really been done over. And they'd been done over, and I'm going to use my parliamentary privilege, Mr Deputy Speaker, by a company called Pogus Goodhead. Now, they approached the Primidos campaign. They approached them to take over the case. They then got cold feet and decided to drop the claimants and the victims when they didn't fancy their chances of winning. Not only to compound that, they then went on to withhold the documents that constituents like mine, Wilma Ord, had presented to them and given to them to pursue the case. That prevented the campaign from being able to find other legal representation, and fundamentally has meant that the campaign was unsuccessful in court. That, in my view, is a hostile and odious movement by any legal firm. Now, the court citation states, shortly after the service of the dependent's evidence, by Pogus Goodhead informed the claimants that they could no longer act for them and applied to come off the record. The material placed in support of the solicitor's application to come off the record is privileged and has been withheld from me and from the defendants. They are the words of Mrs Justice Shipp. Now, some claimants discontinued their claims, as she goes on to say, and then she talks of the issues around managing a case with so many litigants that do not have representation. Mr Deputy Speaker, in their mission statement, Pogus Goodhead say they are a global partnership working to help individuals, groups and businesses to seek access for fair and tangible justice. What a load of absolute nonsense. And I want to appeal to them directly today, because I'm pretty sure they'll be watching, and I'm pretty sure the lawyers that worked on the case will be watching. Give our constituents their documents back and come clean on exactly how you pulled out of that litigation. And for shame on the government for going into cahoots with that crowd and leaving our constituents and those victims in that situation. That's state-sponsored and funded actions against our constituents and against our citizens. So I have to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, as many, many people have said, you know, this is an injustice that has gone on for decades. Like contaminated blood, like Hillsborough, like the thalidomide case, it seems to be the order of the day and the order of government to make people wait for decades to traumatise them and re-traumatise them. And the Baroness Cumberledge's review clearly took a different view from the expert working group and concluded that the manufacturer and the state both had an ethical responsibility to find a financial scheme for those harmed. And finally on my hit list are Bayer, formerly Shearing. They said that they didn't think that financial recompense was, or they said it was not appropriate. Last year, their profits were $4.4 billion. They made millions off the back of Primados and off the back of the damage that was done to our constituents. So I'm sorry, it's not good enough for the Minister, it's not good enough for the government, it's not good enough for our citizens. They need to get off their backsides, they need to do something about this, because we, as parliamentarians, as campaigners, as constituents, are not going away.